This is part 4 of cells and environment, where I'm going to start talking about the extracellular matrix. So we've talked about how tissues connect and the cytoskeleton. Now we're going to talk about the extracellular matrix. So as I just said before, we were talking about how cells connect to each other. And now we're going to talk more about how cells connect to basement membranes and the extracellular matrix which surrounds those tissues. And this is really important, and it's often forgotten that the environment a cell is in can really affect a cell's behavior. And the extracellular matrix, cells are quite delicate things. It's that often bears the mechanical stresses and stretch, things like that the tissue will experience, and it's what protects the cells within it. So here you can imagine we have a cell, and this is the surrounding extracellular matrix. So you can see that that cell is effectively cocooned within a scaffold of extracellular matrix. And that extracellular matrix is both protecting it, but also affecting its function. You can see other example of extracellular matrix in this diagram here. And this is an example of a blood clot. So you see the red blood cells here and platelets shown in purple here, and you can see big throngs of extracellular matrix which help to bind that clot together. So that's really important in protection from wounds. So what this means is, as I've already kind of stated, is the extracellular matrix, in very simplistic terms, it's like the scaffolding that surrounds the cells. So the cells have a cytoskeleton that does produce some structural integrity, but it's the extracellular matrix that is really protecting and surrounding it, just like scaffolding will protect an old building and help prevent it from falling down. So as well as that scaffolding, it's providing structure, mechanical support, but I think we can't forget as well that it's also providing biochemical support in cells in terms of this connective tissue. And we'll try and talk about how it interferes with the biochemistry of the cells in a little bit later. I think most of us will be familiar, or the most familiar, with the extracellular matrix as connective tissue. I think we all understand what connective tissues is. The other thing that we can't forget is that cells adapt to the extracellular matrix. So if you placed or seeded stem cells onto different extracellular matrices, different types of connective tissue, for example, they would differentiate into different types of cells depending on the form of the extracellular matrix. So you could determine whether the cell becomes a muscle cell or some other kind of cell, for example. Now, the extracellular matrix also forms what we call basement membranes. So we've probably spoken about basement membranes in terms of tissues in certain organs. And these tend to be thin sheets of extracellular matrix that separate different parts of tissues. So if you think of skin or blood vessels, the cells are attached to that basement membrane. So this is an example, this here is an example of a cross section through an artery. Here we have the lumen of the artery, and we have the inner layer, the endothelial cell layer, but this kind of wiggly line that is surrounding it, that's that is a basement membrane with a single layer of endothelial cells facing into the lumen. That separates the endothelial cells from this smooth muscle cell layer here. And you can see that red color. You can see bits of connective tissue invading through the smooth muscle cell there, keeping it together. And again, there's the second external, so there's external elastic lamina and the external elastic lamina, sometimes known as the adventitia on the outside. And then there's a lot of connective tissue outside that with cells embedded in the extracellular matrix. So how does the extracellular matrix come about? Well, the extracellular matrix itself is often secreted either by specialist cells, which help form the extracellular matrix, or even by the cells within that tissue or organ themselves. Now, probably the most common form of protein, and in fact probably the most common form of protein in the body, are the long protein fibers called collagen. And you can see, I will just draw through one of the collagen fibers here. So they're, if you like, the scaffolding, the major protein component of most extracellular matrix. We also have large sugar coated molecules called proteoglycans. Now, proteo means protein, glycans means sugar. And you can see these are these almost leaf-like structures here, and they help. The sugar coating of molecules help cells recognize each other or recognize the extracellular matrix, but also provide lubrication and other structural features. And then finally, we have specialized molecules such as fibronectin. And fibronectin are very large proteins that help cells either attach to the extracellular matrix or, as you can see in these other examples here, connect other elements of the extracellular matrix to each other. So looking at some of these major components of the extracellular matrix in a little bit more detail. So we'll go back to collagen. Now this is the most abundant protein in the body. So it's about 25% of all your proteins by weight. It's largely a structural protein that forms long molecular cables, if you like. So it's formed of the collagen forms long cables like this, and they then form a kind of network of cables, that kind of meshwork which we saw in the electron micrographs there. So it's kind of like it forms a meshwork, and they do things like strengthen tendons. Or the tendons in our body are made of collagen. If you think about our bones and our teeth, they are formed by a collagen basement or network to which crystals of minerals like calcium are added, and they harden to form the bones. The other thing that collagen also does is it's acting as a protection. You can probably imagine looking at this network here, this meshwork. You can see, it's like almost like cotton wool. It's protective, so it both supports and protects softer tissues and helps also connect them to the skeleton. So imagine your muscles, you've got the very dense skeleton, and those muscles are connected to that via the collagen network. And the reason collagen is so strong is that there's chains to the collagen molecule that are wound together in a very tight triple helix formation, which gives great structural strength. I also mentioned the proteoglycans. They're the glycosylated proteins with sugar chains. So the proteoglycan class, and it's quite a diverse class of proteins. Essentially, you have a central, I'm just going to draw this on here, a central protein backbone chain, to which we have long sugar molecules branching off that main protein chain. So that's the glycosylated parts. And these long sugar chains can help to lubricate the layers of the extracellular matrix. And indeed, the surface tension in, for example, a lubricated collagen extracellular matrix or membrane is far lower density than or friction than ice, largely due to these proteoglycans. And actually, if you were to ice skate on lubricated extracellular matrix, you'd probably be able to ice skate at hundreds and hundreds of miles per hour. It's such low friction. But it's also important that the side chains can modify the activity and the stability of other proteins in the extracellular matrix. And if you look at those sugar molecules in a little bit more detail, and this is an example of one of the sugar molecules, which is hyaluronic acid or hyaluronate, you can see it's just large chains of sugar molecules joined together. And that's what we call a glycosaminoglycan as well. So we have a sugar molecule, and then an amino group joined together. So it's alternating to form these chains. In terms of what they do, well, quite a few different types of these side sugar chains, and I'm not going to go into them in any great detail, but you can see there's quite a few different types of these sugars, and they all play slightly different roles in the extracellular matrix. And I don't think you need to really understand that at this level of the course. Going on from the proteoglycans, I also mentioned these connective proteins, fibronectins. And fibronectin is a very important protein. And it is an extremely large protein, 440,000 Daltons, huge. And it's also a glycoprotein, falls into that glycoprotein class. Now, what's so special about fibronectin is that as part of this huge molecule, it contains lots of different domains which bind to surface molecules called integrins. And I've already mentioned integrins briefly, but they're things expressed on the cell surface which helps the cells integrate with the extracellular matrix. They bind to fibronectin. So what hopefully you can see here is that all these different domains, so there's a domain for binding to cell surface receptors, but there's also domains for binding to other elements of the extracellular matrix. Okay, so these are connector proteins They're kind of like clips that can join things together. So it can also bind to collagen and fibrin in particular. So fibronectin is a large structure, multiple domains, helps attach cells to the extracellular matrix, and it's very important in processes like wound healing as well. So it helps form blood clot formation, which you'll learn more about in this module next term and also next year. And believe it or not, you will also learn about this in parts 3 and 4. So this information is fundamental and underlying other parts of your courses. Now, in terms of the extracellular matrix, it's also very important in cancer, and that's something we'll come to talk about a little bit more later. And this brings us to this rather peculiar looking animal, the naked mole rat. And they're a fascinating species of animal. They have a very unusual life cycle. But one of the things is, for a small rodent like the naked mole rat, they live much longer than other rodents. Most rodents, like your average rat, would live 2, maybe 3 years. These guys can live up to 25 years, if not more. And one of the key features is on those proteoglycans, they have very large sugar molecules. So the hyaluronic acid in mole rats is about 5 times larger in a naked mole rat than it is in humans. And this helps to form a protective cage. It helps that extracellular matrix form this protective cage around cells, and it makes cancer cells, which occur naturally all the time, but it makes it very difficult to migrate through the extracellular matrix, and therefore these animals don't really experience cancer. So they're an interesting study species, and it shows how changes in the extracellular matrix can actually affect how a disease might occur.